So the first thing we wanted to do is ask, well, first of all, let me introduce my husband, Jess Grover Bragg.
Hi.
We're happy.
Nice to see you all.
And handsome too.
Woohoo! I like it already.
Wow, you're so cute.
I'll move in here myself.
We'll get you everywhere. He said he's going to move in.
Nice.
Anyway, I think he's pretty cute too. So, anyway, so he has been an avid collector of all things comics and comic books since he was a young boy. And we'll talk about his passion, but I wanted to ask publicly, I already asked a few of you, what do you think of when you think of comics? What comes to mind? Just shout out anything.
Superman and Dagwood.
Blondie and
Superman,
Dagwood.
Blondie and Dagwood.
Pogo.
Pogo. Good.
A page from the newspaper, so comic strips.
Yeah.
Okay.
Superman.
And my husband at 80 turned to the comic page first.
I agree with that. I
Yes.
ignore the front page.
Smart, getting smarter every day. So this is, you're going to go on a journey with Jess today that takes you to places you never even knew existed when it comes to comic books and comic book collectors and all of that. So Jess, do you want to just sort of give a quick little overview of the history of the comic world?
Using this cheat sheet?
Yeah, just anything, not the whole thing, but just some.
I've been collecting comics. Why don't I give a little
Oh, sure, anything.
thing about it? I've been collecting comics since I was about 6 years old. So that makes it 54 years that I've been collecting comics.
Young antiques.
Right, I'm a young antique.
You're a young
I'm a young antique. And so, as a little kid, I loved comic books and I loved comic strips, and so I was very interested in finding out the history of comic strips.
It's cutting your head off here.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Okay,
you
Nick.
adjust that a little bit. That's a little better. Still a little bit. Sorry, I just didn't want you to have
Oh,
a
no,
bad
no,
I
video.
appreciate it. Is that okay now?
Yep.
Thank you. So I was always interested in I not only liked the current comics, this was back in 1965. And as I got older, maybe 8, 9, 10, in the 60s, I developed not only a passion for older comic books, like from the 40s and 50s, but also for comic strips that dated all the way back to the late 1800s. The first comic strip character was called Yellow Kid, and it was published by the New York World, owned by Joseph Pulitzer. And he was just simply a kid dressed in yellow, like a yellow dress, and he was bald, but he would have political things written on him or his thoughts for the day, and that was considered the first comic book character. That was in 1895. So comic strips
Before your time.
comic strips are extremely old, and they used to be a focal point of newspapers. They would hire away hot comic strip artists from other newspapers, because a lot of times at that point comic strips would help sell newspapers, because this is back before radio, or way before television, and comic strips were a major form of entertainment. And back then, this is how big they would be. This is Little Nemo. This is a book I own, Little Nemo. And he was one of the most famous comic strip characters of all. And I'm gonna have to hold it open for you, but this is how big they would be in the newspaper.
Oh, wow, those are actual size?
Yeah, because back then the newspaper would have pages and pages of comic strips, and they would devote as much space as they possibly could to it.
Excuse me, what years was it?
What years was Little Nemo?
Yeah, when they,
This is probably the The time period I'm talking about is probably 1910. Yeah, very good. 1910 to probably the heyday, slowed down when radio came in to play, and that wasn't the death knell of radio. I mean, of comic strips, but interest in comic strips sort of lagged at that point. And Little Nemo was. He was this big, and there's like the Katzenjammer Kids, and Blondie and Dagwood, and Mutt and Jeff, Crazy Cat.
There was a whole section of the newspaper, comics.
Yeah, and they were all in color, which was a big deal because everything else was in black and white. And I don't know if you all remember Calvin and Hobbes. Do you remember Calvin and Hobbes from the 90s, 80s and 90s? Mm-hmm. Well, Bill Watterson became such a well-loved and respected cartoonist that he said that he drew Calvin and Hobbes to the size he wanted in the Sunday papers and said, if you don't run it the size I want it, don't publish it at all. Because if you look in the Sunday papers now with comic strips, they're shrunk down and there's like 4 pages of comic strips. And when I was a kid, I just laid them out on the floor and they were huge pages, but they've shrunk them down, and he was so respected, almost 100% of the newspapers gave him his full half of the newspaper so he could he could publish Calvin and Hobbes.
Who was that again? Oh,
Bill Watterson
Bill
for
Watterson.
Calvin and Hobbes. So Crazy Cat, Mutt and Jeff, Winnie Winkle, who I never heard of, Gasoline Alley, that was a popular one. That was a big achievement back then because their characters aged in real time and had families and everything, and you saw them grow up and things like that. Lil Abner's another popular one that the nation was all flipped out about when he and Daisy got married. I remember that.
Winnie Winkle was a girl, and I think she was like the 40s era.
Well, it started in 1920, but went till 1996. But it probably had its peak in the 1940s because it was the first one to have a working woman as its main character.
Central character.
Central, mental character. Little Orphan Annie, Blondie, those appeared in 24 and 30. Terry and the Pirates. Those are just some of the ones off the top of my head. That takes us through the 50s. Pogo, of course, was fantastic and had some of the most trenchant and biting satire you could get. Walt Kelly was not afraid to take on anybody. He even took on McCarthyism back in the 50s, and that was a pretty brave stand when nobody else was willing to do it. A cartoon comic strip was willing to do it.
Which is a really interesting time. So what happened when McCarthyism was happening in terms of comic books? I mean, and comics.
That's getting ahead of you.
Oops, sorry.
It's a good thought, but you're 3 minutes ahead of me.
Okay, go.
So the first comic book was really just a collection of comic strips. It was called Famous Funnies, and I think it got published in 1933. And it was just a collection of comic strips. The first, then they started making comic books with original stories and original characters, and the most famous of those was in 1938 when Superman debuted. And right on his heels, Batman was introduced. And at this time, National Publications is who put those out, and they changed their name to Detective Comics because that was the first, Detective 27 is where Batman first debuted, and so they changed the name to Detective Comics or DC Comics. You have DC Comics and Marvel Comics. Those are the big two, DC and Marvel. There's all kinds of other comic book companies in there, but it's DC and Marvel. So we've got other famous comic book characters: Captain America, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Brenda Starr. That was a comic strip. And in 1950 was the debut of the most famous and popular strip ever, and that was,
Peanuts.
boom, you got it
Very
right.
nice.
Very nice, Peanuts, by Charles M. Schulz. It ran from 1950 to when he died, which I think was in 2000. And that's a Peanuts Classics book I got when I was 9 years old. And I will just do an aside about Charles Schulz. I was Peanuts crazy as an 8-year-old. 1967 in Carmel, California, and my room was decorated in nothing but Peanuts. And this shows you what a different time it was. Somehow I got his mailing address for his home, and I wrote him a letter, and that started a 3 or 4 year period when he would actually answer my letters, either handwritten or typed. Charles M. Schulz would write me back. And 1967, 68, Peanuts was very popular. I mean, they named one of the Apollo mission spacecraft after Peanuts in 68 or around there. And to this day, I don't know how he had the time to actually respond to some little kid in Carmel. And and they were very nice letters, and I'd write him, I'd send him my drawings, ask him how things were going there, just typical 8-year-old stuff. What bubblegum do you like to chew? I don't know, whatever I asked him.
Now,
But
Peanuts was an Evening Star, right?
Well, it was syndicated to hundreds of thousands.
Washington Post had it too.
Yeah, I was in California, so I don't know anything about it
He was in all
now.
papers, I think.
I think pretty much every newspaper carried
Okay.
Peanuts at one time or another.
I had the Star, and someone threw it away. Last comic strip of his.
Oh, okay.
Well, it seems to me you've got something that's worth a lot of money.
Well, they're personal letters, and I don't know that anybody really wants a personal letter.
Personal letters are the best.
Yeah, this is the generation.
Forgetting
That's
the,
true.
money out of it.
Oh, you want to show the?
I'm getting to
Okay.
that.
Oh, sorry.
DC was having so much success that, and there was a company called Timely Comics that put out like the Human Torch and Captain America. They became Marvel Comics. This is back in the 40s. And what was the figure you quoted me about how many millions, hundreds of millions of people read comic books back then? Didn't you quote me a figure? Come on, Patty, I'm asking you a question. Okay, we're gonna go with tens of millions of comic books sold at a time. It would be nothing for a comic book to sell 500 or 800,000 copies. The GIs read them in World War II. Kids, all kinds of kids would read them because radio really hadn't become popular yet. Or I take that back. Radio was popular, television hadn't become popular yet, so comic books were a main form of entertainment for young people and adults alike. So that takes us up to the 40s, and I guess since I did my little talk about Charles Schulz, I'll stop at the 40s for comic books and get right back to it. But when I was in second grade in Carmel, there was a famous cartoonist who lived in Carmel named Eldon Dedini, and he used to do single panel strips that were very popular and famous. He did them mostly for Playboy and Esquire, and he was very well known and very popular, and he lived in Carmel. And so one day, my teacher in second grade, Mrs. Estes, I still remember her, he came and spoke to our class, and I was already a budding cartoonist. I had stacks of drawings every day in school, and he came and talked to our class. And I must have had a golden tongue as a little kid, because I went up to him afterwards, and you generally don't ask people things like this, but an 8-year-old would. I said, could you please draw me a picture of an elephant wearing glasses, sitting down and reading a book? For some reason that cracked me up, and looking at it, it still cracks me up because he did it. And he sent it to me.
My.
He got my address,
Let's see.
and here's the elephant with the glasses. And he also included a personal note, which I will read to you.
Oh, wow.
And this was a
Me?
This was
And
a
what
big.
does the letter say?
He's
This-
about to read
I'm about
it.
to read it. He got on the back is his obituary, and he got a big obituary in the Post. But this was now looking back on it, it's a big deal because you generally just don't go up to famous cartoonists and say, "Will you draw me a drawing?" That's I don't know.
Pretty cute.
I guess so. Well, I'm cute now, so I was cute then, probably.
He's shy too. I mean,
It says, "Dear Jess, here's the elephant with glasses reading that you asked for. I liked your stories. Greetings, Eldon Dedini." So we got this framed, and it's been a treasured, since second grade, it's been a treasured possession of mine.
It's hanging in our family room.
Yeah. So we stopped at the 40s. In the late 40s, EC Comics came out, and EC Comics came out. They were a New York comic publisher. They were all based in New York at this time, and they had titles like Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and Weird Science and things like that. And they were very graphic. When somebody today complains of violence in comics, all you have to do is go back to the late 40s, early 50s, and look at those comics that EC put out, and they are way over the top. Now, they would also tackle social issues, things like racism and inequality, and they would work those things in that other publishers were too afraid to tackle. But they were very graphic, and in the early 50s, the Congress of the United States got a hold of enough of these that they got upset, and there was a big uproar against comic books that they were causing juvenile delinquency. This guy was named Dr. Wortham. He wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, and it basically lined out all the things that he thought were wrong with comic books. Like, there's Bruce Wayne, he's Batman, and he has young ward Robin, Dick Grayson, living with him in his mansion. He's a billionaire, so he's millionaire playboy Bruce Wayne. And he tried to infer that there was something going on between Robin and Batman, and it got Congress all hot under the collar. Shocking. So they held hearings, and they put EC Comics out of business. And all the DC and Marvel, well, it was timely at the time, they became Marvel later, had to adhere. They promised that they would change their ways. And they came up with the Comics Code. There was a little box on every comic that says approved by the Comics Code Authority. This meant it was safe for your kid to read and wasn't going to cause him to be a juvenile delinquent.
Is it still on them?
Not anymore, but it was till about the early 2000s.
I thought it looked.
Yeah, for the longest time, it was a big deal that your comic had to have the Comics Code Authority on it. So EC went out of business, but Bill Gaines, the publisher of it, came up with something that far surpassed it, and that was Mad Magazine. Which, for those of you that remember Mad Magazine, it was a staple of my childhood. But yeah, that's when Mad became popular, and Mad's still being published today.
Would it receive the code?
No, it was a magazine. That's how we got around it. Good question. He made it a magazine. Mad was a magazine and could do anything it wanted. It wasn't violent, but it was the most trenchant political satire, especially through the 60s, that you could possibly, 60s and 70s, that you could possibly get your hands on. As a little kid reading it, I thought it was interesting, but then as an adult looking back, I was like, how did they get away with this? Because they were very satirical and poked fun at everybody, including themselves. But that's what happened in the 50s, and then comic books continued to thrive, and then in the late 50s, early 60s is when Marvel started to put out things like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, Thor, Iron Man. And the difference between Marvel and DC at this time, Marvel took over as the top selling publisher because Marvel wanted their characters to have real life problems. When you're Superman, you don't really have that many problems when you're most powerful being on the planet, and Batman, at the time in the 50s and 60s, Batman was going off on these goofy adventures that were clearly written for 8-year-olds, but Marvel changed the dynamic by making everybody have problems. Iron Man was an alcoholic, the Human Torch, he had his issues, the Thing in Fantastic Four, all these people had real life problems, especially Spider-Man. Spider-Man could never catch a break in the early 60s as a teenager, and that's what drew a lot of people to Spider-Man, especially like college students and young adults, because it seemed more real. And DC was late to the game. They were still making sort of goofy superhero comics. They eventually caught up, and they became famous for tackling things like racism and poverty and all drugs. But DC was lagging in the game for quite a while in the 60s because Marvel was willing to talk about real issues. Did you know that?
No, I'm learning a lot.
Well, all right. There's a lot more in here, but I think that pretty much covers, I believe, what we wanted to know about the history of comic strips and comic books. And my own personal history is that I read comic books from the time I was 16 until the time I was 17, and then I felt I had outgrown it. Sorry?
6 to 7.
6 to 7, what did I say, 16?
16 to
Sorry,
17.
thank you. That I was 6, it always helps to have a moderator. From the time I was 6 till 17, and then I felt I outgrew them. But then in 1985, there came out 2 comic books that changed the comic book world. I doubt you've heard of them. These are things that only a nerd like me would really know about. But it drew me back into comics in 1985, and it was one was a Batman comic book by a guy named Frank Miller, and it was called The Dark Knight Returns. And it featured a much darker, much grittier character, one who wasn't afraid to kick butt, and the central concept was that it was Batman out of retirement, comes out of retirement because he doesn't like what he sees, and he proceeds to tear apart Gotham City to remake it into an image that he prefers, that he thinks is right. There's a particular gang going on that's taken over Gotham City. This was a different Batman than I grew up with. Batman was, in the 60s and 50s, was a goofy character going to space and fighting ridiculous villains. But Dark Knight Returns was considered a landmark for the comic book industry because it dealt with a character that was part Clint Eastwood and part Zorro. So he was out to conquer crime and no holds barred. He pulled no punches, and so that got me back in. And then there was a comic called The Watchmen by a famous comic writer called Alan Moore. I can't explain it to you here because it's so out there and interesting. It deals with a lot of social issues, and it deals with a lot of human issues, things like human frailty and fear and human psychosis and things like that. And it was 12 issues, and it has become, if not the most popular comic that was ever published, probably one of them. There's always a way to find a copy of The Watchmen because DC constantly puts out copies of The Watchmen. There was a famous movie that was put out of The Watchmen, and then HBO just had a television series about The Watchmen.
And how many of you have ever heard of The Watchmen? Raise your hand high. Ah, Nick, okay.
Right on, dude.
One person. I'm not surprised. I've never heard of it.
No, I like you already.
We do too.
So that got me back into comics, and the comics got a lot better than they were in the 50s and 60s. They dealt with more imaginative characters, dealing with real life issues in interesting and fascinating ways that were compelling to me I also read regular novels, and I like autobiographies, and I like crime and mystery and stuff. But my focus has been comic books for a long time, and DC and Marvel at that time started putting out just remarkable stories that fired the imagination, and that's when I got back into it. So it's been 85 till now that I've been back into it.
And that's awesome. You had one thing I wanted to make sure we go back to when you were kids, and when you were a kid, and that was he did 6 years at summer camp, right?
Oh yeah, no, 10 years at summer camp in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I would give my dad a list of all the comics.
He'd go for like 6 weeks.
6 weeks, and at this time you could only get comics from the drugstore where there was a spinner rack. And the greatest wife in the world gave me a spinner rack for my birthday present about 15 years ago.
I have a picture of it.
Oh, do you? Okay, good.
You should have seen. I mean, he embraced it when he unwrapped it and figured out what it was. He was so excited he hugged it.
It was the greatest present ever because you don't really see spinner racks anymore. At that time, you could only get them in drugstores. Now you have dedicated comic book stores with owners and employees and stuff, and you can have a subscription to your comic book, and you'll go in there once a month and pull all your comics, or probably you'd pull all your comics. They would hold them for you. Well, that didn't exist back in 1968. So I would write my dad a list of every comic book for him to look at the drugstore while I was gone for 6 weeks, and he would. And on the last day of camp, he would drive up and get me and have a huge stack of comics for me to read on the way home. And that used to be my favorite. I hated leaving summer camp, but I always knew I'd have a huge stack of comics that my dad lovingly got for me.
Plus a stack
How old
of.
were you then?
Sorry?
How old?
I started summer camp when I was 8 and ended when I was 17.
Oh.
And so it would be the comic books, but also his dad would save all the comic strips from the newspaper.
Oh.
So I'd go home to 6 weeks worth of comic strips that I would lay out on the floor.
What an indulgent father.
I know! And he in turn has been a very indulgent father.
And what's the difference of prices from years ago?
Prices? Good question. Prices initially started out at a dime a book, and they were very thick. You could get 64 pages for a dime back when comics first started, like back in the 40s. A dime. When I started collecting them, they were 12 cents. Then they became 15 cents, and then they kept going up, and now this is a problem, and I'm not sure how the industry is going to handle it. Comic books are like $5 a piece now.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's hard. That's what worries me, is that it's hard for little kids or young adults to afford a comic book. Yeah, and so it's.
Well, the printing quality is pretty beautiful in a lot of books.
Well,
now, right?
things are more expensive. I mean, wages are higher than they were then. Creators want a piece of the action now. They want to get paid for their creations, which I don't blame them a bit. Printing and paper is more expensive. You can even get $7 comics now. But I figured out a way around that, and that's going to be the next part of my talk. But that does concern me that comics are so expensive nowadays that kids can't afford them.
I think the only answer is libraries.
That'd be good if libraries.
At the libraries.
Right. If libraries collected single issues, that would be good.
Mm-hmm.
But
They don't.
is this where I go into?
Well, let's just sort of take your history a little bit further.
Okay.
So let's talk about you from your 25 to 35 year age. You were still in the floppies world. Floppies is a terminology I want you all to know.
Floppies refer to single issues. Now, this is the first comic book I remember getting as a young man.
Wow.
This is Batman fighting the Penguin, and I still have it in my collection.
You will never find Jess Bragg with a comic book that's not in a protective cover.
Yeah, these are all in plastic bags and boards.
I'm pretty sure I read that.
Oh, wow.
This is the first one I remember. I know I read comics before this. This came out. I would guess probably in 67, so I was 8. So this is the first one I bought with my own money when comics were 12 cents. I'd work and get an allowance so I could get comic books. So I'm guessing this is 66 or 67. And so these are called floppies or singles. And I have an Iron Man one that I brought. These are pulled straight from my comic spinner in my basement that my wife got for me. And this is the origin of Captain America, Tales of Suspense with Iron Man and Captain America. This is a classic comic book in my world.
Very good.
Those plastic covers are neat.
Yeah, they help protect it.
Because
And
otherwise they would be just tissue paper thin by now.
Right, and then I have a series of Superman comic books that I brought.
Yeah.
So
And these
he
are all
has-
from the spinner rack too.
He's had boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of these, and some of them have emotional value. Some of them have some monetary value if he wanted to sell them. And then others he has started to sell in big boxes to people who want to then take them to comic book shows and let people pour through them. Carol has a question.
Yes,
What did you say was the most valuable one you ever had? You
Ah,
would never let anybody hold it or nothing.
it's in a safe deposit box, and it's the Amazing Spider-Man 1, and it's worth $10,000.
How much is it? 10,000. Wow.
$10,000.
Probably loaded value.
how many safe deposit boxes do you have, Jess?
I have approximately 7 safe deposit boxes, all with valuable, 7 safe deposit boxes, all filled with valuable comics. Over the past 10 years, I had probably 50,000 of these single issues. I probably had 50,000 of them.
Not that,
Not this comic,
That
but comics
particular.
like these. I had these floppies, and it encompassed all kinds of characters. But I had about 50,000, and our basement was full of them, and rooms were full of them, and that's a lot of closets.
linen closet.
Yeah, they were all over the place. And eventually I decided it was time to sell them. So I sold them and got good money for them, but I kept a bunch for myself that I thought would be, that I was either emotionally attached to or thought would be valuable.
This is a fun time to, I think, talk a little bit, and then there's lots more growth of the comic book industry. I'd love to show you one of the cool features in our house that really has grown to lending itself to the storing of his collection. When we were in our new home and we'd lived with the old basement for a long time the way it was, we decided it was time to renovate the old basement. And we had both, through Jess, I had fallen in love with the 1950s style. And so I decided to throw him a bone, and I'm really glad I did. I had an inspiration in the middle of the night one night, and I said, why don't we turn our whole basement into a 1950s look? So I really started getting a whole,
You know, we're all gonna feel right at home.
Exactly.
The 50s is what
Right?
we know.
Exactly. Well, that's why I've been excited to show you this. So this was one of our first pieces that we got.
It's a diner booth that we had made.
Yes, so some of the pieces we have are authentically from the 50s, and others we found places where we could have them made. So this is new stuff with the really cool table. We have a little tabletop
Jukebox.
Yeah.
Jukebox,
That
yeah.
sounds
I
familiar.
was just thinking I could probably zoom in a little bit. There we
There
go.
it is.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Everybody in here remembers that.
That's right, they didn't have them at the executive diner. Okay, so that's it. And then I also want to just point out the pictures, the graphic arts in the frames. Jess had one that, and I think it's in one of the next pictures, that was of the very first McDonald's. And the artist was at the torpedo factory in Old Town. And Jess developed a friendship with this guy, and in the end, we had one of the largest collections of his work because so Dixie Pig,
Yeah, there's the
barbecue,
Dixie.
Yes,
Yeah.
Dixie Pig.
the little tavern. So he took iconic little buildings in this Washington metropolitan area and beyond, and he would, what was the style of his work?
Silk screen.
Silk screen. So that sort of inspired a lot of the art, a lot of the look in our basement. So the next thing and I don't know if this was the order, we got an ice cream soda fountain bar.
That's great.
That's a big
Isn't that
basement.
fun? And we found a few dealers who had a lot of this kind of stuff. But here is, for example, an actual menu from the Little Tavern. And,
What was Little Tavern's slogan?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know.
Buy 'em by the bag.
Oh,
Okay,
buy 'em
that's
by
right.
the bag. That's right. Buy hamburgers by the bag.
Yeah, there were those little
No,
sliders.
buy hamburgers, buy
You show them the size
No,
of
no,
the
no. But that's
hamburger.
what was in. That's what was in
They
the bag.
they have little sliders now.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got a question, it's probably none of our business, but you all you've gotta take care of this stuff and insure it.
Yeah.
That's.
I bet they thought of
That's
that.
my job.
Yeah.
That's his job, and we have
And I do it.
We have had, as you can continue to see what's in our basement, keep in mind, we have had 2 massive floods
Oh, that's
in
right,
the last
yeah.
10
Yes,
years.
I remember that.
Oh,
And
what
it's
did you do?
amazing this has, so much of it survived, but we had water up in our, pouring into our
You got
basement.
your house fixed now that you can't do that?
Yeah.
Yes,
We've had
it
all
was
the-
all the land, it was because I had such wonderful landscaping ideas in our backyard, and nobody said, this might cause a water backup, so sure enough, we had water. So check this out, so right here is the original silk screen of the McDonald's hamburger.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
The original golden arches.
Is it an
How many
item
have they
because they
sold by then?
sold a million?
Yes. Well, it says, we have sold over 1 million. Oh, no, it's an M because it's McDonald's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so we also, I love this picture here. This shows a television. At the time we were putting this basement together, we were collecting things and telling the story about the television. Jim.
This is a tube RCA TV
Yeah.
Yep.
from about 1965, and
One of everybody's.
Does that look familiar?
yeah,
Yep.
it's a tube TV. And I was out for a run one time. This is probably 1995 or 6 at some point. I was out for a run, and this was on the side of the road at garbage day,
Oh.
along with this huge console. I'm sure a lot of people had them that had like a television and a record player and a radio in it.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we had one growing up too. And I ran back to my house, got in my car, came back, and I loaded that thing in my car, but I put a note on the person's door and I said, I took your TV, I know you were throwing it out, but if you have a problem with it and want it back, just call me. And I left my phone number, but he never called me. So now it does have a tube broken, so it doesn't work. I mean, I could get it to work, but it's really more of a centerpiece, showpiece type conversation piece.
Probably glad that you picked it up.
Yeah.
Right.
I wanted that console too, but by the time I got back there, it had been picked up.
So this is the television area of our basement, and these are authentic, right? These
Yeah,
chairs are
those
authentic
are from the
50s, and a curvy couch.
That's from the 60s, the curvy couch. That table is from the 50s.
The wooden table?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Donna Jean, I bet you're having a hard time seeing just when we're showing pictures. Right, exactly. So just when we're looking at pictures, I'll let
Okay.
you step back. Okay. And we also got an authentic jukebox from it was from a bar, and we knew it was from a bar because the first time we opened it to see all the little 45s inside, it reeked of smoke. Reeked of smoke. I mean, everything about it. But that still works and we use it and we put new music in it, but it's got a lot of fun Christmas music in it and a lot of oldies. And we also have a, what am I trying to say?
Star Trek pinball
A
machine.
pinball machine.
Oh,
And it's
Star
Star
Trek.
Trek, and it lights up, and when you score enough, the
Yeah, if you do a few things right in a pinball machine, there's a screen on there and the characters transport. They disappear and appear.
So what evolved from this is, as a part of this, we were on a journey for a few years collecting this stuff. And it took us to some interesting flea markets, and Jess started talking to people who had really funky collections. And that led to Jess having a TV show. He had his own television show, and tell them about it, and I'll cue it up.
Oh, okay. Back around 1993, I remember reading in the Post about Channel 8 in Fairfax County, which is cable access television. Every cable system has to have a cable access, this is mandated by Congress, every cable system has to have a cable access channel and allow the public to go on and present whatever they want to present, as long as it isn't inflammatory. So I read about that and I thought, that sounds really interesting. All you had to do is take a few classes to learn how to use the equipment, and then you had to get volunteers. You had to get a director, an assistant director, somebody to run the Chiron, which is what puts the graphics on the TV, and a cameraman and a lighting person. So it was all volunteer. So I said, I bet I can get collectors to come on there and talk about their collections, anything, because if it's man-made, it's collectible. People will collect anything.
Some of them.
How true.
Some of the ones I interviewed,
Uh-huh.
yeah, some of the people I interviewed, well, I had one comic book collector on, old TVs and radios, Barbies, which I think is what we're going to show, Barbies,
Salt and pepper shakers.
Salt and pepper shakers, Hess trucks,
Perfume
bottles, bottle openers, interesting bottle openers.
I used to collect roosters.
There you go.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah. Roosters.
Where'd you
Dottie.
Roosters too.
Dottie.
Yeah, my mom gave me most of mine for Christmas. Christmas and
You're
birthday.
talking to people that have left all these kind of things and bringing it up to mind again, because a lot of us didn't have much say in what happened to it.
Yeah.
Well, my time is coming. She's seeing to that.
But we wanted to show you a 5-minute clip of his television show. All right? So this is, and I want you to know, we have not seen these for decades. And I found that we have a VHS machine here in the building, and 2 nights ago, I sat in front of it with my camera pointing at it, and I took a video of 5 minutes of the show. But we're dying to convert them all to DVDs so we can see them again, because this is really fun. Wait till you see my handsome husband. This was you were about 36.
Yeah.
This was his theme music.
Thanks for tuning in to Collector's Showcase, where it's Barbie's world, and the rest of us are just visitors. Or I think that's the philosophy of my guest, Lynn Blake. Would you agree with that? The rest of us are just visitors in this all-encompassing world of Barbies?
Visitors, but welcome visitors.
Welcome visitors. Do you
Yes,
think,
indeed.
would it be a fair statement to say your world revolves around Barbies at this point?
Yes, I think my family would agree with that.
Well, that's
Kind of
good.
consuming.
I like a committed collector.
Yes.
Now Barbie is an American icon, very popular with all ages of women and maybe even some men. I know there are a lot of men collectors
Yes,
too, correct?
there
Let's start with the very first Barbie.
Okay.
And what does she look like? Maybe we can compare her down the ages, see how she started out.
Well, this is the number 1 Barbie. She has arched eyebrows. She has no color to the irises of her eyes.
And when did she come out?
She came out in 1959, and
These are 36.
right in 1994 she celebrated her 35th anniversary, and they came out with this doll right here, which is Mattel's reproduction of the original Barbie.
Now, is that how she was dressed when she was released? She looked sort of like a tart to me.
No, although there was a lot of flack about her hard appearance when she first came out, and they did soften her appearance in 1960. And this is 1960 Barbie, known to collectors as the number 3 Barbie. And if you'll notice, her eyebrows are now rounded.
Mm-hmm.
She has a softer appearance, and she has blue eyes.
Now, the first Barbie had black hair. The one you have has black hair.
Okay, the black-haired Barbie, or the brunette as she's known as, is rarer than the blonde Barbie.
Oh, there
2-to-1 ratio.
Okay.
2-to-1 ratio. She was available in blonde or brunette. And then this is number 3 Barbie, coming out in 1960.
And she's got a little, what is that, wig case, shopping Barbie bag?
This is a very favorite outfit with collectors called commuter set, and she could change from this very sophisticated satin blouse to a tailored check blouse.
And that's what was in that little
That was what
round
was
belt,
intended to be in the hat box.
Now, I'm assuming that little hat box probably got lost a lot of times. That's probably a collectible in itself, is that right?
That little hat box alone would be about $150.
Okay, so it did get lost a lot. It is pretty rare.
That's right. Part of the whole pricing of Barbie is the little pieces.
The accessories.
The accessories, the pieces that didn't survive Mom's Hoover.
Right.
Yes.
I see those shoes going up the pipe.
That's right.
Now, the original Barbie, she's probably pretty pricey with the box and stuff. Is that right? She's up there?
She really is very pricey. She retailed for about $3 at the time that she came out in 1959, and today is worth thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars. But we need to put a caveat there, only in mint pristine condition.
Not well played with.
Right, with everything she
Magic
originally,
marker.
precisely. 1960, again, 1960, this is the number 3 we just talked about. Number 4 Barbie, 1960. The difference is, and you'll notice these first dolls had very pale skin tone. 1960, the tail end, we came out with another Barbie known as number 4 Barbie, and her skin tone is quite tan. This is one of the most famous of all Barbie outfits.
This is
called
Skin Cancer Barbie.
This is Skin Cancer Barbie. No, she has no wrinkles. No,
I still have her with the black
spotlight,
dress.
and it is such a favorite among collectors and
It's not in
any
good
woman
condition,
that
but I
had a
have.
Barbie as a little girl. That Mattel just came out last week.
Let's see if we can
with
hold this one out.
Yes, with this reproduction of Solo in the Spotlight.
This is a reproduction.
Right. This retails for $25. You can get it at Toys R Us if you're
Now, that's the kind of hot tip my viewers are looking for. Where
That's
can I
right.
get something that's going to be worth
You
something
can
in the
pick
future?
this up at Toys R Us. You can pick it up at KB Toys. You can buy it through various mail order houses. I would suggest this is a good investment doll.
And
So that's the end of the clip, and Jess has a fun, so isn't that great? He did that in his mid-30s.
So I did about 36 of those shows. The only reason I quit is because I ran out of collectors. I put an ad in the Post looking for collectors, and it got me hundreds of letters of people that collected things, and I culled them down to the ones that I thought were most interesting. But the Post wouldn't let me run another ad. Apparently the first ad had been a mistake that they allowed me to do it. It was just a little classified. But I couldn't get any more collectors, so the show had to end. But I did it for 3 years and did 36 shows.
And what he had to do was find both an interesting collectible, but also an owner of the collection that was engaging. And sometimes, you know, somebody might be way too shy or a little over the top or whatever. So we also had to take that into consideration, that they had to be interesting people.
Right.
And an interesting side note, so in this story, they were just talking about the fact that a collector's edition of the Barbie in the black dress had just come out. And they were talking about the fact that it was probably a pretty good investment for someone to buy that because it would be valuable. And what happened?
The market tanked.
Oh, no.
They made too many Barbies of too many kinds, ranging from really expensive to reasonably priced, and the market collapsed. And now, number 1 and number 3 Barbie are just as collectible, but anything new as of the mid-90s that somebody bought is only worth the enjoyment the person gets out of it. It's not valuable at all, which is one of those things you have to be careful about when you're a collector of anything, is collect what you love first. Maybe it'll be worth something, but you never know with the vicissitudes of the market. Sometimes things are beyond your control and the market tanks for that particular collectible, and you could get stuck with them. So you better love what you collect, because it's possible you could get stuck with them.
Good advice. So if any of you are thinking of starting a new collection,
Think twice.
Yeah, I'm thinking about starting a new collection.
what? No, I don't want to know.
Wives.
Why? Okay, so this is a great time to change the subject. So now we're talking about the mid-90s, and a new kind of comic book came out at this time that I'm guessing most of you haven't heard of. And those are called graphic novels.
Yeah, graphic novels and collected editions of comics came out starting around the mid-90s is my best guess. This is a book, this is considered the ultimate graphic novel, Art Spiegelman's Mouse. Very famous book where he writes about his father's experiences in the Holocaust. It's 2 volumes.
Oh my God.
And he draws the Jews as mice, the Germans as cats, and the Poles as pigs. And so they're anthropomorphic. They don't appear as people, but they appear, and they're standing up, and they're in their full Nazi uniforms. They're in their concentration camp uniforms as mice and cats. And it tells the story as related to him by his father, who had to go through concentration camps back during World War II. This book actually won the Pulitzer Prize for a book, and that's a big deal for a graphic novel to have won the Pulitzer Prize. This is considered one of the greatest graphic novels ever written.
Just open it and show one. Good. No, that's not what I can do. I just thought while you're talking a little bit more about graphic novels and their evolution, that I could show just what it looks like on the inside. And so graphic novels, my understanding is that graphic...
I'm sorry.
Oh, this is what I do every time their song comes up. One of these days I'm gonna get a plastic rose to put between my teeth. So the big difference, let's see, with graphic novels, the story and storyline was created for this purpose. It was not created to be part of a newspaper as a comic strip. Am I saying this right?
Yeah, and not as a part of a comic book that would be collected later. This was dedicated to putting it out in book form.
What's that? Right, so this is
No, this would be a book that he drew specifically for the books.
Comic style, but not so comic strips is what you see in the newspaper, and then
But these are illustrations that were
a form of reading.
right, that were put into book form. That's why it lent graphic novels an air of instead of it being a comic book, the fact that it won a Pulitzer made it a legitimate book. And graphic novels have exploded since the early 90s and mid 90s. And you can find all kinds of subjects by all kinds of people that are written, autobiographical, biographies, stories of young kids. It's a story that's written specifically for that book. And as opposed to a collected edition. This is a collected edition of a character called Magneto, who's a foe and sometimes friend of the X-Men. But this is a collection of comic books put into trade paperback form. So it's a trade paperback.
So it's like a book full of the floppy comics, but reprinted all together as a collection.
And this is how I got around the $5 comic, is by waiting and buying them in trade paperbacks where they were cheaper. Trade paperbacks will have anywhere from 6 to 12 issues in them and retail for $20.
Wow.
6 to 12 times $5, that's a lot of money, but trade paperbacks are much cheaper, just as good, and the only problem is you have to wait a year because floppies come out first and then then the trade paperback comes out, then the paperback comes out. And I have several examples of that. Here's Supergirl.
So these all start, everything that's inside there started as the individual floppy books, but then they were reprinted featuring one whole character or one whole storyline. So,
And then we come to the Omnibus, which is a big collection. This has 900 pages, and the book I pulled is Oz, and it is a wonderful book. It's the L. Frank Baum. It's like all of his stories, not just the one we're all familiar with. But this came out with, let me see how many issues are in this. 1 through 8, 6, 16, 24, 32, 37. There's 37 comics in this book.
How much would a book like that cost?
It's $100, but if you're a smart shopper, there's lots of places that will sell it to you for 40% off, which is where I would buy mine. I don't pay full price for anything at this point, so I would hunt down and find a place. I would not go into a bookstore and pay $100 for this. I would order it online. That's one thing the internet has done, has made books like these more affordable. But as you can see, they're beautiful and they're all in color, and it's enlarged reproductions of the original comic in oversized format, and these are called omnibuses. The omnibus. This is an omnibus. And I have lots of them.
which is a perfect segue. So, in the early 20s, his collection really started exploding. And there were 3 main contributing factors to that. The first one was, I was a fool.
What?
No. The first one was that in our basement, I used to have an office. Then we turned it into a little exercise room, and the exercise equipment was collecting dust. And a friend of ours said, why don't you let Jess have a room where he can put all of his comics? And I thought, what a great idea. So we turned one section of our basement that had been previously closed off to our 50s style, we turned that into Jess's comic book collecting room. So suddenly the man goes to having an entire room that he can put bookshelves in and start storing the stuff. But there's some really other cool things that happened at that same time. And I am a huge lover of his passions, and you'll
Yes.
see me say that publicly.
She's a
in
big
minute.
supporter.
I am, and so I don't want to sound like I don't appreciate. So he had his own room, so he had room to expand. He also started going to these things called Comic-Cons, comic conventions, and he met a guy there who ended up being quite a wonderful advisor to Jess on books that Jess could buy for investment purposes. Many of them were fairly expensive, but understanding the market as well as he does, and this comic book advisor, he could invest some of our available funds and tuck it in a safe deposit box, knowing that it could triple or quadruple over a 3 to 5 year period. 10-year period.
Okay.
whatever. But so that's the second thing that happened in the 2000s, and then he also started having an online presence through the computer world, and we'll delve into that. I just want to keep moving on this. So let's look at each factor. So first of all, I want to show you some pictures of his comic book room, because it is way cool, and it's the reason it's going to take us a little while to downsize to Montebello. Cecilia lives in Montebello also. All right. So this is just one portion of a wall in his room. And what you'll see are comic books. A lot of them are the trade paperbacks. I'll zoom in. I think I can do this. Okay. So this is cool. This is.
And I like to collect action figures and statues too, so they decorate the place.
So look, this is a series of books on Batman, and he has action figures like these dudes. You can hold up those guys. Action figures in front of the books.
Oh, look at that.
So you can see. And then he also has these really big, he didn't bring because they're too fragile. These really tall statues also, and that's what some of these are here. So this is part of his room. There we go, Marvel comics there. I bet a lot of you didn't have rooms like this in your house. More bookshelves, and he has them really nicely done. He's built some wonderful bookshelves for them all. I know, I knew that I had to throw that one in because those are recognizable. Those are right up there. But that's all Peanuts books that he has. So that's one thing. Oh, and also, then he started sort of expanding out into, whoops.
That's our jukebox.
Yeah, that's our jukebox. I put it back in the wrong place. Then he started sort of sneaking out into the main part of the basement.
Oh, that's the rack.
There's the rack. There's the spinning rack that I found. Someone was selling an old spinning rack. And there it is, exactly. And then behind our cool sofa, he has all these fun and amazing statues. And I will say, they are works of art.
Beautiful.
They just, you can see the muscles in these characters. They're rather voluptuous too, as you know.
Voluptuous.
Yeah, look at that one. Look at the green one. Poison Ivy, is that her name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, some of Jess's male friends really love going down and seeing this collection, but they are beautiful pieces of art. I will give him that. Let's see. He also, the reason he loves our snow village and the village we've been doing, this is it's kind of dark, but
it's hard to see.
It is, but it's a diorama that has a whole bunch of action figures doing all kinds of fun things, and he's learned how to propel them in the, or not propel,
pose them using wire, heavy wire. You can take your action figures and put them into action by wiring them up.
So like, who's this guy?
Hulk.
The Hulk.
Very
Yes,
good.
very good. And who's this, Jess?
This is Wolverine.
Wolverine, okay. So Wolverine is flying through the air with his, whatever those are.
His claws.
His claws, yeah. I like this stuff. I don't profess to be an expert.
No.
And he also,
I
yes.
think that you like this as well as he does.
I wouldn't go that far, but I love his passion. So he also has an album collection. He's had albums. He's loved music his entire life, all kinds. And so he still has a stereo. And look at those fun, different records up above. We have them displayed.
45s.
Well, these are not. These would be.
I do have a lot of
I'll
45.
bet you have a lot of 45.
But look at the one that's Batman shaped.
That's a great record right there.
And then I can't show you, but the Marilyn Monroe one on the back, on the flip side, is very risque. Yeah, it's sort of her flip side.
Risque.
So there's is that a blue record?
Blue vinyl, yeah.
A blue
I like to
vinyl.
collect colored vinyl.
Did you ever collect a vinyl with a entire picture on it?
Oh, a
printed
picture
on
disc?
Disc, yeah.
Yeah, I generally
Not a
do.
disc, a regular 78, like that size.
Oh, 78s?
Yeah,
My dad had 78s.
we had those. We
Yeah.
had them with the pictures on them. Oh my
Right.
gosh.
Yeah, I listened to 78s growing
Where
up.
that went.
He
Yeah.
loves music. Loves music. Okay, so let's see what's next. So I mentioned the other thing is that he went to comic book conventions. How many even knew that there were comic book conventions? Or
I had
comic
no idea.
conventions?
I'm sure, I was sure there would be.
Yeah.
You know Joshua Glenn, my grandson.
Yes.
He hasn't missed any.
Okay.
He goes all the time, Comic-Con.
Comic-Con, that's it, that's the language.
That's the big one in San Diego.
He's always off to Comic-Con.
The biggest one is in San Diego, and it gets like 250,000 people
Yep.
over 5 days.
Yep.
And then there's a big one in New York City and Denver. And this happens to be a picture of one in Baltimore that Jess went to, and that's pretty close by. Tell him about your relationship with Damien.
Oh, okay. Damien is my friend that I met in 2014, and I just struck up a conversation with him at a small show, comic book show, and she alluded to the fact earlier that he became an advisor. So, to the amusement of my comic book friends, I call him my comic advisor. Much like you have a stockbroker advise you, he advises me on comics, and so he is kind of a full service guy for me. He flew air combat in Iraq, then worked for the Air Force, and now he's a pilot for United. So what I wanted in a dealer, friend, advisor, was the most normal person I could get. I am the first one to admit the comic book world is filled with oddballs. I am one of them, so I know him. And this guy is about as normal as you can get, but he invests in comic books. And so he started advising me on what to buy and sell with 3 to 5 to 10 year time horizons. He'd say, this should make you money in 3 to 5 years, knowing that when I started, eventually we would retire and have our expenses and things, and that's what I thought would be a good idea, would be to invest in these comic books, sell them for 2 or 3 times what I bought them for, and use it for things like health and expenses and things like that.
He's 4 years younger than I am, so I warned him that when I'm able to go on Medicare, he's on his own.
I have to pay for my own health insurance, so I'm selling comic books for
4 years
that.
till he's able to get Medicare, he's going to have to cover his own expenses through this passion.
So
That's a fair deal, don't you?
I put some books on eBay this morning, as a matter of fact. So I am going to be selling books through eBay and auction houses, so I can get cash in to pay for my own health insurance for the next 4 years. And what the industry has evolved to now is a grading system so that you know what you're getting when you buy something on eBay, because comic books come in various conditions: good, very good, fine, fine plus, very fine, near mint, like that. But it's very subjective. What I look at and see as a very fine book, the seller may think is a near mint and want to charge me more money. So they a comic book company called CGC came up with a way to take the subjectivity out of it, and they put them in these things called slabs. They put them in plastic, and they give them a number grade.
Can you take it out of the cellophane
Yeah,
wrapper
yeah.
just so they can see?
And they give them number grades. The
It's
grades,
like they're hermetically sealed.
yeah, the grades go from 1 to 10. I rarely have ever seen a 10. That's called gem mint. And this book is an 8.0. It's Dr. Strange's first appearance in his own title. He appeared, I won't give you the history of Dr. Strange, but he appeared earlier in other titles. This is his first book. And so I brought this as an example to show you of this is what I buy and sell over eBay, because I don't have to worry about some guy thinking his book's in better condition than it is.
Who's in charge of making sure it's all like it's supposed to be?
You mean,
Yeah.
So he
it's
takes
like
a
it's
book,
all-
You
he
send-
takes a book that he buys,
Mhm.
and he wants to make sure it is, the subjectivity is taken out of the grading, so he sends it.
I send it to CGC, they're based in Florida.
Oh, okay.
They have a team of graders, and they go over it with a fine-tooth comb, and they give it a grade.
Yeah, well, that's
And
great.
they look at everything from the binding to,
Well, the spine is usually the most important issue, especially on a dark cover like this, because there can be spine ticks, which are little bends that can wreck the color. There could be a name or a date stamp on them. The corners could be folded. There's a number of things that can go wrong. 8.0 is not a bad grade. I'm happy with an 8.0. I'd rather have things in the 9-point range, but those are very expensive. I do have a lot in the 9-point range.
What?
But they're mostly in my safe deposit box. What's that now? What?
How much?
oh, how
No.
much would they be worth?
No, did you ask what my 9.0s were?
You said they were very expensive.
Yeah, they can be thousands of dollars. Yeah, if anything in the 9.0 range and above, if it's a key issue, if it's like the first appearance of Thor, first appearance of Iron Man, things like that, key issues, they're called key issues. And if it's a key issue that's in 9.0 or up, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, those are thousands of dollars. And well, I don't want to say it with Patty here, so sometimes I buy them. She doesn't know about it though.
I trust him. I trust him. Because oftentimes he'll sell some things to get the cash so that then he can afford something else that's going to return a bigger profit.
Right.
So it's all an investment strategy.
That makes sense.
And I will say that, the stock market is so volatile, and some of you have been in it and been out of it, and there is some predictability to some degree. And what are some of the things that would really increase the value of a book?
Nowadays, the announcement of a character getting his own movie or TV show is what jacks up the price of a book. Or it's the very first appearance of a new character they're going to build a whole big storyline around. As an example of what I've done, I've sold a lot of books. 2014 is when I've started. This is 2020, so I've probably sold 50 of my comics. I'm selling one tomorrow to Damien, who's going to be at a show, the airline pilot. I spent $1,100 on it, and I'm selling it to him for $3,300.
Wow.
So in 5 years, I tripled my money. Now that's not necessarily how it's all going to go. I'm happy when I get a double. If I can sell something and double my money in a short period of time, then I'm happy. It's the rare cases where you triple or quadruple your money. Tripling is my goal, but doubling is what I settle for. And even 50%, those are pretty good returns.
This is all gonna take a lot of time. I mean, you're
Definitely.
doing a lot.
This is what I spend most of my day doing.
Yep. He's a
Comic books.
retired stay-at-home dad.
Just
So he raised our daughter. Well, it just happened that I had a career that I really loved, and we met sort of late in our late 20s for Jess.
It was
early
late for
30s.
you.
Early 30s for me. And so we had our child, and I had a career that was really going well, and we decided that I would be the one to work and he would stay at home and take care of our daughter. So, and he did an amazing job, and he did all the cooking and all the cleaning and everything else that he always used to say, I did the same thing your mother did, but with a mustache.
Well, I just think the two of you have organized a wonderful thing.
I know, we
Wonderful
compliment
marriage.
each other. We compliment
We're
each other.
impressed.
Oh, thank you, thank you. That means a lot coming from all of you. So I just want to also jump in before we run out of time, because it's already 2:45. Then Jess has become an online internet sensation.
I don't know that it's a sensation, but there's a thing on the internet called YouTube where you can make your own videos and publish them, and you can watch them. And I started in 2016. I'm part of a Facebook group called the Omnibus Collectors Comic Swapping Community, short for that, just the Omnibus group, named after Omnibus, these big books. So we focus on collected editions, and these guys invited me to be on their show. And
On their YouTube
on their YouTube show, right. And it turned out so well that, we have fans, and I said, while keeping my relationship with these guys, I was gonna make my own channel talking about comic books. And I have 4,000 subscribers now, and I've got
all over the world.
all over the world. I mean, I get letters from people from Spain, from Portugal, from Japan, a lot of fans in England.
I'm gonna say this, just he wouldn't, but he gets some of the most beautiful letters from people. Someone, will say, things have been really rough for me this year, and I want you to know that tuning into your show has given me so much joy. And I mean, he gets these beautiful letters. People will send him gifts. It's remarkable.
When you say tune into your show, how are they getting your show?
On the computer.
On the computer?
Yes.
On the computer, yeah.
So you can go to something called YouTube on your phone or your computer, and I do show a lot of little videos around here to some of you that are YouTube videos, but somebody will find out. He goes by OmniDog.
That's because my little avatar, the little picture of me that appears on my name, is a real close-up of our dog Archie that passed away in 2015. And I'm in the Omnibus group, so they call me OmniDog. And so the name of my channel is OmniDog's Vault. And I think we're going to see a little bit of it here to close out the discussion. And I have 5 to 6 shows a week that I do with the other guys and by myself. And
Interview some folks. Before I forgot, I wanted to show you. So a big thing at these comic book conventions is that some people dress up like the characters. And what's it called, Jess?
cosplay.
Oh, Lord.
Oh,
I see more of those than I care to count.
Here's some good ones. And some of them are hired to go to conventions.
You can make a living as a cosplay player. As a cosplayer.
Sure. Yes.
And I will say, Jess has been very forthcoming on this. There are a lot of buxom broads at these things that dress up like female superheroes.
That's why Josh goes.
Here's the one in London. There's a big one in London. This was a commercial I saw for it. These are people heading to the show. So this is a picture of Jess in his separate room, and this is where he poses with the laptop open in front of him like this, and the camera taking the video of him. And what are some of the things you'll do? You'll review.
I'll review books. I'll talk to other collectors. I've got an interview this Friday with a famous colorist who does the colors in comic books. I have an interview coming up next month with a famous writer. We generally will talk about current events in the comic book world. We'll talk about movies, Marvel movies. Marvel is the one that makes all the big movies. We'll talk about anything if it's comics related. People rely on me for a lot of reviews. For some reason, they think I have good taste. So I take it seriously.
You do with wives.
I do with Patty. This is the mask I wear. That's Archie's face, and that's the mask I wear for 2 seconds when I introduce myself on OmniDog's Vault. That was the Valentine's episode that we did. Is that what you're going to show? Okay.
So last Valentine's Day, he's referred to as the silver fox. And a lot of the guys that he does these shows with are quite a bit younger.
They're all 30,
Yeah.
in their 30s.
They're smart 30-year-olds. Last Valentine's Day, they knew they needed to do something with their girlfriends and wives. Jess, on the other hand, asked me if I would be his co-host on his show that night. So that's what I'm going to show you.
Picture of you. It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
It's not.
Good evening and welcome to Omni Bros Live. I'm OmniDog here on Valentine's Day with Mrs. OmniDog as my guest.
I was so nervous.
I'm OmniDog. That, okay. And as you can see, my modem got fixed. I have a clear picture, no lag. I got my modem replaced, so everything should be copacetic and everything's good. So, hi, sweetie.
Hi. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
And the camera's too far away, but this little ornament on the ornament tree, you can put it all the way
Go ahead.
close so they can read it. I love my wife more than collecting comic books. Yes, my wife made me do this. What does it say?
Yes, my wife.
Yes, she bought this.
I got it for him.
So first, happy birthday to Omnipool, Angel Ruiz, a very awesome guest in the chat. We always have him in the chat, so happy birthday, Angel. And this would be a good time for me to talk about InStockTrades.com, where you can get your
Yes.
I have a sponsor that pays us money called InStockTrades.com, and that's where they are an online seller of these books. And that's where I'll get them for 40% off, and they're kind enough to sponsor me and give me money.
Wow.
So the arrangement is, except for the investment books that you use real money for, he gets paid for doing some of these online shows, and that money he puts into his fund purchases. So
I was going to ask you, Jess, how do you play with your friends? You already answered the question. I don't have to ask anymore.
Yeah, this is how they
Seems
play.
to be everybody, yes,
Well, I don't have any local friends that are into comic books,
yes,
but I've got 1,000 friends online.
apparently,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, it's really amazing, and it's really helped me in this phase of my life to have so many friends.
Yes, and you're making a whole lot more than meals.
Yes. Yeah, I've started enjoying cooking, so that's
Yes.
anyway, so we'll do a couple more minutes of this show.
editions up to 50% off. Loyalty discounts add 2% to that. Every quarter there's a special Omni Bros code for more percentages off. Over $50 in the United States gets you free shipping, fabulous service, and fabulous packaging. That's InStockTrades.com. And
So on every show, he has to do a promotion for In-Stock Trades. And they have so many regular followers, that's why In-Stock Trades wants to have them, wants to sponsor them.
okay, just calm down there. I know, I can tell. Here's an unsolicited response.
So what's
Here's
happening
an
is,
There's a chat box.
so we're looking at the face of his computer that's recording us, but at the same time, on the screen, it's a chat box, and people can send in questions. So the hosts, Jess and others, the hosts are constantly scanning that chat box because somebody will ask a really good question and they'll say, oh, so-and-so wants us to answer the question, blah, blah, blah. So Jess is about to read something somebody asked.
Solicited thing from Travis Gervais, who had a great experience with In-Stock Trades, and he wrote me today to let me know. Good day, Jess. So I just wanted to share what IST did. I accidentally ordered 2 copies of a book last week, and Cameron reached out and asked me if I meant to get 2 copies, which I didn't, and then he quickly refunded me my money and sent out my order. Top-notch business. Just wanted to share another outstanding IST customer service story. Thank you, Travis Gervais, for talking about our sponsor in glowing terms, because they are awesome indeed. So another satisfied customer in Travis Gervais. And so
Okay, so Chris M gets put in timeout already. That didn't take long.
I can put people in timeout that ask inappropriate things.
Oh.
So I was dying to know. Did he say something racy about me?
I think he might have.
Yeah. So just put him in timeout and wouldn't let him be a part of the show for a while.
It means I didn't dig what he had to say,
Oh.
so I'm putting him in timeout. This is my wife, and this is the Valentine's Day episode. And you are invited to send in your questions to Mrs. OmniDog about love and life and what it's like to live with a comic book nerd like me, which is fine.
Let me say that.
Yeah. What is it? Okay, we'll start off with asking, what is it? And don't be trying to be funny. Just be honest. What's it like to be married to an uber nerd like me? It's probably I mean, I was collecting comic books when we met. And
Not like this.
Not like it's been hardcore for the past 10 years, but I still was reading comic books and had them. I guess I was more of a sports nut back then. And I'm still a sports nut, but so what's it been like being married to an uber nerd like me?
Yeah, I think I'd say I would rather be married to someone who has a huge passion and interest in something fun like you do than somebody who's an uber nerd who's into technology or something. I mean, you have a good sense of humor. You have to have a good sense of humor to be collecting all this stuff. So it hasn't been bad. I think there have been times when I've wondered how much more you're going to be getting. That's the only time. But besides that, I love your passion, and I think it's really cool that you do this show. I love what all the goodwill stuff that you all do. I think for each other. You know, going out and finding books that other people are looking for and helping those who might be going through a tough time. I think that's an incredibly awesome aspect of this show and the group. So I respect people who have passions. I think it's great.
Mm-hmm.
And you're a fun guy. From the day I met you, I knew you were going to keep me laughing. And yeah.
Okay.
So.
You've got your Valentine.
And I have a good sense of humor too.
Yeah. Let's see.
I think that's probably
Yeah, I
enough
think
of
that's
that.
enough.
All right. Okay, so then.
Let's see, has Mrs.
All right.
I think we need to wrap this up.
Yep, the last thing I wanted to do is just show a quick little thing of Jess with his own show.
No, I think.
Oh, you think that's enough?
Yeah, I think that's
okay.
enough.
All right, well, that's fine, I agree. All right, I'm gonna spare,
Yeah, you're gonna spare us.
wait, I did want to show one. For those of you who have not seen, my husband did something pretty amazing, not many men would do.
Oh, heavens.
This is a picture of when he's on YouTube live with some of his other hosts.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll all be talking to each other, but they're all doing it on their computer. So they have a live chat like that. These guys do some pretty amazing things together. Charity for one another. One guy came up with an idea, for example. There was a guy who was going through a really awful time in his life, is disabled or has disabled children.
Oh, you mean Mike?
Yeah.
My friend Mike Ashley has two severely disabled, physically disabled children, and he's only able to work out of the house with his wife. And some friends of his, because they don't get out much, some friends of his got together over the period of a year, went to every comic convention they could go to, and took video of creators speaking to Mike and his wife, got him to sign all kinds of interesting comics, and got signatures and drawings, and it was a huge stack of amazing things. And the idea was they wanted to take a convention to Mike, and that's one thing they did. And all these friendships were made online.
That's nice.
And so they sent boxes and boxes of things. Tell them what some of the things.
I just did.
Oh, you did. Sorry.
You're slipping.
Okay, so the last, so they do raise money, they do all these wonderful charitable events, and for those of you who haven't seen,
Oh, Patty.
I just had to, because it shows the length to which you will go to do good things for other
This is
people.
part of a fundraiser that
They did a fundraiser, they set a goal for $500. Anybody who watches their shows could contribute. And it would be for children who were in the hospital, maybe had cancer, and that they could send as many comic books as possible. And they set a goal of $500, and they agreed that if, two of you agreed, right? That if you met your goal, you would dress up as female superheroes.
Yes. And we eventually raised 800 for that.
Okay?
Oh, wow.
So my husband got a costume for Wonder Woman, and he went to great extremes to look like Wonder
And
Woman.
I'm not sure if we can handle this.
Well,
Very nice.
I shaved my beard for
He
her.
shaved his facial hair.
I'm sorry she's gonna leave us with that image.
Me too. Let's go back. It's a little scarring, isn't it, Barbara?
Imagine having to live it.
Yeah. So we'll remember him looking the way he did with this show, because he was a foxy young man.
Are you going to pause it when I'm here?
Yeah.
I like the music.
Isn't that
Everybody get a little chocolate.
Look
There we
That's
go.
what we're gonna
That's
leave
better.
as the image.
That's better.
Well,
Very
Jess,
nice.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, waiting and I've been wanting him to do it for a lot of years.
She's been wanting me to do this for 5 years, and eventually the ocean washes away the sand, and she got me to do it.
And
Jess, we
I
have
loved
to-
it. Oh, I loved it. This was great. You've been a great audience. Thank you very
We have
much.
to tell you,
That was
you've
fantastic.
already
I know.
found wonderful.
Now you can,
oh,
now you can go.
thank you. Now you can go.
I do want to sit down, but that's about it. I really enjoyed myself, and you were a great audience. Thank you very much for
Yes.
paying attention.
Come back again.
Well, you're a good talker.
Well, thank you.
Really interesting. Thank you. All right.
Yes.
Great. So if you want, you can come up and take a look. I'll even take a couple pictures if you want to take pictures with any of the stuff.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Very good. I have to tell you, Amazon let me down. I ordered a backdrop that I could